The strongest people are never the ones who demand respect. They are the ones who remain calm after losing it. The sound echoed through the grand ballroom before I even realized what I had done. My hand still trembled in the air while hundreds of guests froze beneath glittering crystal chandeliers. Conversations vanished. Glasses stopped halfway to waiting lips. Even the string quartet seemed to forget the next note. I had just slapped Nathan Brooks, the man every newspaper called the most powerful businessman no one truly understood, and every rumor insisted was a mafia boss. My heartbeat thundered inside my chest, but I refused to lower my eyes. He had stepped in front of me only seconds earlier, blocking my path as the annual charity auction prepared to begin. His tailored black tuxedo looked flawless beneath the warm golden lights, and his calm blue eyes revealed nothing that matched the frightening stories people whispered whenever his name appeared. I had spent years hearing those stories. Powerful, untouchable, dangerous. A man who always got what he wanted. I believed every one of them. That was why I refused to let him speak another word. "I will never be yours," I said loudly enough for every person in the ballroom to hear. My voice shook, but the words did not. A wave of quiet disbelief swept across the crowd. Several guests exchanged nervous glances. Others instinctively stepped backward, expecting security to rush toward me or expecting Nathan himself to react. Nobody moved. Nathan remained exactly where he stood. Slowly, he turned his face back toward me after the force of my hand had passed. There was no anger in his expression, no humiliation, no desire for revenge. He simply studied me with the kind of sadness that made my certainty feel strangely unsteady. For several long seconds, he said absolutely nothing. The silence became heavier than any argument could have been. Finally, he reached inside the inner pocket of his jacket. Every person in the room stiffened. Instead of removing anything threatening, he quietly unfolded a weathered envelope with careful hands, as though it contained something too important to rush. He looked directly into my eyes before speaking in a calm voice that carried effortlessly through the ballroom. "Emily Carter," he said softly, "I never asked you to belong to me." Another long silence settled between us. Then he gently held the envelope toward me. "I came here to return something your father spent the last 15 years hoping you would one day receive." Every heartbeat inside the room seemed to stop. My father had died 2 years earlier. No one outside my family should have known anything about him. I stared at the envelope without reaching for it. "You are lying," I whispered. Nathan slowly shook his head. "I wish I were." Around us, photographers lowered their cameras. Reporters stopped writing. Even the auction host remained speechless beside the stage. Nathan never stepped closer. He never demanded that I listen. He simply waited, leaving the decision entirely in my hands. I searched his face for arrogance, manipulation, or satisfaction. Instead, I found quiet patience and a burden that looked far older than either of us. My anger refused to disappear, yet something far more dangerous quietly took its place. Doubt. If everything I believed about this man had been true, why was he giving me the freedom to walk away? And why did the envelope in his hand suddenly feel heavier than the slap that had silenced an entire room? The envelope remained suspended between us for several silent seconds before I finally stepped back instead of reaching for it. My pride refused to let curiosity win in front of hundreds of watching eyes. Nathan lowered his hand without the slightest sign of disappointment. He carefully placed the weathered envelope back inside his jacket, as though protecting something far more valuable than paper. Then he nodded once, almost respectfully. "When you are ready," he said quietly, "it will still belong to you." Without another word, he turned and walked away through the ballroom. No security surrounded him. No one demanded an apology on his behalf. Guests instinctively moved aside as he passed, yet he never looked back. I stood frozen beneath the chandeliers, suddenly unsure whether I had defended my dignity or misunderstood everything that had just happened. The following morning, every local news station replayed the moment again and again. Headlines praised my courage while commentators debated whether anyone had ever publicly challenged Nathan Brooks without consequences. Friends called to congratulate me for standing up to a powerful man. Coworkers at the children's hospital where I worked smiled with admiration as though I had become an overnight symbol of bravery. I thanked them politely, but something continued bothering me. Nathan had never answered anger with anger. He had answered it with a letter carrying my father's name. 3 days passed. Nothing happened. No threatening messages arrived. No lawyers contacted me. No anonymous complaints reached the hospital administration. Life simply continued. During my lunch break, I carried coffee into the pediatric rehabilitation wing, where children practiced walking beside colorful murals painted by local volunteers. One of the nurses waved me toward the recreation room. "You missed the donor visit this morning," she said. The foundation brought another shipment of therapy equipment. I glanced around the room. Brand new rehabilitation devices stood neatly arranged beside adaptive wheelchairs, sensory toys, and interactive learning stations. Everything looked expensive, yet no banners or promotional signs filled the room. "Which foundation?" I asked. The nurse smiled. "The Brooks Community Foundation. They have supported us for years." I felt my stomach tighten. "Nathan Brooks." She nodded as though everyone already knew the answer. "He never comes with reporters. Usually he visits before sunrise so the children are not interrupted." I stared across the therapy room where several young patients laughed while testing equipment that had clearly changed their daily lives. None of it matched the image I had spent years believing. Later that afternoon, I remained behind after my shift ended, organizing patient files before walking toward the hospital entrance. Through the glass doors, I noticed a familiar black sedan parked across the street. Nathan stood beside it wearing a simple navy overcoat instead of the formal tuxedo from the charity gala. He was speaking quietly with the mother of one of my young patients. She smiled through grateful tears before embracing him briefly. Nathan never looked toward the hospital entrance. He simply wished her family well, shook hands with the child's grandfather, and helped carry 2 boxes of medical supplies into their vehicle before stepping away. There were no photographers, no cameras, no audience waiting to applaud. He quietly returned to his own car and drove away before anyone inside the hospital even realized he had been there. I remained standing behind the glass long after the sedan disappeared into afternoon traffic. For the first time since I had raised my hand against him, the question echoing inside my mind was no longer whether Nathan Brooks deserved my anger. It was whether I had judged an entire man by stories told by people who had never truly known him. The image of Nathan helping that family stayed with me far longer than I wanted to admit. Every time I closed my eyes, I remembered the quiet gratitude on the mother's face and the complete absence of cameras. It was impossible to reconcile that man with the one I had spent years fearing. Still, one kind moment could not erase an entire reputation. I needed the truth, not another rumor. A week later, the hospital organized a free rehabilitation fair for families who could not afford ongoing therapy. Volunteers filled the gymnasium before sunrise, arranging treatment stations, educational booths, and children's activity areas beneath colorful banners. I arrived carrying patient files and a cup of coffee, expecting another ordinary day. Instead, I noticed several unfamiliar volunteers already unloading medical equipment from plane delivery trucks. No company logos covered the vehicles. No reporters waited outside. Everything seemed intentionally simple. While helping organize therapy supplies, I overheard 2 older volunteers talking near the entrance. "He was here before 5 this morning," one of them said quietly. "He checked every wheelchair himself." The other smiled. "He always leaves before families recognize him." I did not need to ask who they meant. Curiosity quietly replaced the certainty I had carried for years. During a short break, I walked outside toward the parking area behind the building. Beyond a row of maple trees stood a temporary storage tent where additional supplies were being organized. Nathan was there, wearing dark jeans, a navy sweater, and work gloves instead of an expensive suit. Without saying a word, he helped several volunteers carry heavy therapy tables into the building before carefully kneeling beside a damaged wheelchair. He adjusted one loose wheel himself while listening to an elderly maintenance worker explain the problem. When the chair rolled smoothly again, Nathan simply thanked the man for noticing it before moving to the next task. No one treated him like an untouchable figure. They treated him like another volunteer willing to work. I remained hidden behind the doorway, unsure whether to leave or step forward. Before I could decide, a little girl wearing a bright yellow jacket ran toward Nathan holding a drawing folded in half. She proudly handed it to him. He unfolded the paper with the same care he had shown the envelope carrying my father's name. The drawing showed a smiling family standing beside a colorful therapy room. Across the top, written in uneven handwriting, were the words, "Thank you for helping me walk again." Nathan smiled warmly before crouching to meet the little girl's eyes. "You did the hard part," he told her. "You never stopped trying." She hugged him without hesitation before running back toward her parents. He quietly folded the drawing and placed it inside his notebook instead of throwing it away. Something inside me shifted. That small moment carried more truth than every headline I had ever read. As I turned to leave, my foot brushed against a stack of empty boxes, creating enough noise for Nathan to notice me. Our eyes met across the quiet parking lot. I expected him to mention the charity gala or remind me of the slap that everyone else still talked about. He did neither. He simply offered the same calm expression I remembered from that night. "Good morning, Emily," he said gently. "I am glad the children have people like you." Before I could answer, he reached inside his canvas bag and carefully removed the same weathered envelope. Holding it toward me once again, he spoke with quiet patience. "Your father trusted that one day you would be ready to hear his voice again. I will wait as long as it takes, but the letter was always meant to find its way home." The envelope felt unexpectedly warm in my hands, as though it had carried part of my father's presence through every year it had remained unopened. I watched Nathan for a long moment before finally accepting it. He did not smile with satisfaction. He simply lowered his hand and stepped back, giving me the space to decide what came next. The rehabilitation fair continued around us with children laughing, volunteers arranging equipment, and families moving from one therapy station to another, yet the sound seemed distant compared with the quiet weight resting inside the weathered paper. I slipped away to a small garden behind the hospital where wooden benches overlooked a pond surrounded by maple trees just beginning to turn gold. My fingers hesitated before carefully breaking the old seal. The handwriting inside stopped my breath immediately. It belonged to my father. Every letter looked exactly the way I remembered from birthday cards and notes he used to leave beside the coffee maker before leaving for work. "Emily, if you are reading this, then I was not able to explain everything myself. That is the only regret I carried into every new day." Tears blurred the page before I could continue. I closed my eyes for a moment, then forced myself to read every word. "Your life was never meant to become connected to Nathan Brooks. Mine was. Years ago, when our rehabilitation center faced permanent closure, I met a young man everyone warned me to avoid. They told me he was dangerous. They never told me he was the first person willing to help without asking for recognition. Your father wrote that Nathan had quietly funded medical equipment, paid salaries, and kept the center open so hundreds of families could continue receiving care. No newspaper ever reported it because Nathan specifically requested complete privacy." Then came the final paragraph. "If anything ever happens to me before I can protect you myself, trust Nathan long enough to hear him. You do not have to agree with him. You do not have to forgive him. But please do not judge him before you know the truth that I was never allowed to tell." My hands trembled as I folded the letter. Every certainty I had built over the years suddenly felt fragile. A gentle breeze carried fallen leaves across the stone path as I returned toward the rehabilitation fair, still holding the envelope close against my chest. Nathan was standing alone beside the donation tables after most of the volunteers had left, quietly helping an elderly man load folding chairs into a pickup truck. When he noticed me approaching, he thanked the volunteer before walking over without rushing. Neither of us spoke immediately. Finally, I looked up and asked the only question that mattered. "Why did my father trust you instead of telling me everything himself?" Nathan's expression grew thoughtful. He looked toward the families gathering near the playground before answering. "Because he hoped you would never need to carry the burden he carried." I searched his face, no longer looking for deception but for understanding. "There is still something you are not telling me." He nodded slowly. There is. His honesty surprised me more than another explanation would have. Then tell me now. Nathan glanced toward the letter still resting in my hands before speaking in the same calm voice that had never once tried to force my decisions. Your father's letter explains why he believed in me. The next truth explains why someone spent years making certain you never would. At that exact moment, Claire approached quietly carrying a small locked metal box wrapped in protective cloth. She placed it carefully into Nathan's hands before looking at me with gentle concern. This belonged to your father as well, she said softly. He asked that it only be opened after you finished reading the letter. The small metal box rested between Nathan and me on the wooden picnic table long after Claire quietly stepped away. It looked ordinary, worn by time, with faded scratches across its dark surface and a brass lock that had clearly been opened countless times. Before finally being sealed forever. Nathan never reached for it. Instead, he gently slid a small silver key across the table until it stopped beside my hand. Your father wanted you to decide when the past became the present, he said softly. That choice was always yours. I wrapped my fingers around the cool metal key before slowly unlocking the box. Inside rested a leather notebook, several photographs, and a folded map marked with handwritten notes in my father's familiar handwriting. I lifted the notebook first. The opening page carried a date from nearly 16 years earlier. Every entry described the same rehabilitation center where I now worked, documenting families who had received treatment because anonymous donations had arrived just before the facility faced closure. Every donation had been listed simply as coming from a private benefactor. Near the middle of the journal, my father finally wrote the name I had never expected to see. Nathan Brooks refused to let anyone know he paid for every therapy room renovation because he believes gratitude belongs to healing, not to him. I slowly turned another page. There were photographs of volunteers unloading medical equipment, smiling children using brand new therapy devices, and my father standing beside a much younger Nathan during construction of the first rehabilitation wing. Neither man stood in front of cameras. Both looked covered in dust, carrying lumber and supplies beside ordinary volunteers. I looked up from the notebook. Why keep all of this hidden? Nathan rested his hands quietly on the table before answering. Because people should never feel indebted for receiving compassion. The simplicity of his answer left me speechless. Every story I had believed painted him as someone who demanded loyalty through power. The evidence in front of me revealed someone who quietly gave without expecting recognition. I continued reading until another folded sheet slipped from the notebook. It contained a list of community projects planned years into the future, including children's therapy programs, scholarship funds, and neighborhood health clinics. Several had already become reality. Others were still unfinished. At the bottom of the page, my father had written one final sentence. If I am no longer here, finish this work together if life ever gives you the chance. Tears blurred the ink before I could read it again. I carefully folded the page and placed it back inside the notebook. He believed we would meet again, I whispered. Nathan nodded once. He believed you would eventually discover the difference between reputation and character. The afternoon sun drifted lower across the hospital garden while families gradually returned home. Children laughed near the therapy playground, completely unaware that my entire understanding of the past had quietly changed beneath the shade of those maple trees. I closed the metal box and looked directly at Nathan. I am not ready to apologize yet, I admitted honestly. Not because I think I was right, but because I still need to understand everything. A faint smile appeared across his face, filled not with victory but with relief. That is all I ever hoped for. As we stood to leave, my phone vibrated with a new message from an unknown number. There were no threats this time. Only a photograph taken at the charity gala on the night I slapped Nathan. Across the bottom, someone had typed a single sentence. Keep believing he is the hero, and you will never discover who truly benefited from your father's silence. The anonymous message stayed with me long after I deleted it from my phone. Whoever had sent it did not want to frighten me. They wanted to plant doubt where trust had only begun to grow. For the first time since meeting Nathan, I refused to let someone else decide what I should believe. If I wanted answers, I would find them beside the man everyone insisted I should fear instead of listening to voices that never showed their faces. 2 mornings later, I arrived at the Brooks Community Foundation before sunrise. The building looked nothing like the headquarters of a man surrounded by endless rumors. Volunteers carried boxes of books into classrooms while nurses organized free health screenings and college students prepared breakfast for children before school. The air smelled of fresh coffee and warm bread instead of polished luxury. Nathan was already there, rolling up the sleeves of a simple navy shirt as he helped unload wheelchairs from a delivery truck. He noticed me almost immediately but never looked surprised. "Good morning, Emily," he said with the same calm respect that had become familiar. "You came early." I nodded. "I came to work, if you will let me." He smiled gently. "No one needs my permission to help someone else." Those words stayed with me as we spent the next several hours side by side. I organized therapy equipment while Nathan quietly repaired shelves inside a children's reading room with several local volunteers. He thanked every person by name. He listened far more than he spoke. Whenever someone praised him for supporting another project, he redirected the credit toward teachers, therapists, donors, or volunteers standing nearby. Watching him, I realized he protected other people's dignity as carefully as he protected their futures. During lunch, an elderly woman approached carrying a homemade pie wrapped inside a checkered towel. "This is for everyone," she said warmly before looking toward Nathan. "My grandson graduated from college because your scholarship gave him a chance." Nathan accepted the pie with genuine gratitude, but quietly answered, "Your grandson earned his diploma through hard work." We only opened one small door. The woman smiled through grateful tears before hugging him like family. When she walked away, I looked at Nathan in disbelief. "You always do that," I said. "You never take the credit." He poured 2 cups of coffee before handing one to me. People grow stronger when they remember what they accomplished instead of what someone gave them. His answer reminded me of my father more than any page inside the notebook ever could. That afternoon, we visited a neighborhood rehabilitation program funded by the foundation. Children practiced balance exercises, while retired physical therapists volunteered their time beside young medical students. Parents laughed together on folding chairs as if they had forgotten, even briefly, how difficult life could sometimes be. Standing in the middle of that ordinary happiness, I finally understood why my father had trusted Nathan. Power had never been the center of his life. Service had. As the sun lowered across the playground, Claire quietly approached us carrying a folder marked with tomorrow's meeting schedule. Her normally peaceful expression carried unusual concern. She waited until the children wandered toward the activity room before speaking. "Several major partners have requested an emergency board meeting," she said softly. "They're demanding that the foundation end every public partnership connected to the hospital and the rehabilitation programs." I frowned. Why would they do that? Claire looked toward Nathan before answering. "Because they believe protecting their reputation matters more than protecting the people these programs serve." Nathan closed the folder without reading another page. His expression remained calm, yet I recognized the quiet determination behind his eyes. "Then tomorrow," he said gently, "they will discover which one of us truly understands the value of integrity." The foundation boardroom overlooked the city through floor-to-ceiling windows washed in pale morning light, yet the view could not soften the tension gathering around the polished conference table. Representatives from longtime partner organizations quietly arranged thick financial reports, while Claire distributed folders containing updates about every community program we had spent months protecting. I took a seat near the end of the table, uncertain whether I truly belonged there, but Nathan simply looked toward me with calm reassurance before taking his own place. He did not sit at the head of the table like someone determined to control the room. He chose a seat beside everyone else. That single decision spoke louder than any introduction. After several moments, one of the senior executives cleared his throat. "Mr. Brooks, your foundation has become the subject of unnecessary public attention," he began carefully. "Recent events have created questions among several major partners." No one mentioned the charity gala directly, yet I knew they were referring to the night I had slapped Nathan in front of hundreds of people. The executive continued in the same measured tone. Our recommendation is straightforward. Reduce your public involvement with the rehabilitation network and separate the foundation from several outreach programs. It will protect your reputation and reassure future investors. The room became completely silent. I looked toward Nathan, expecting frustration or negotiation. Instead, he quietly opened one of the folders in front of him. Inside were photographs of children learning to walk again, elderly patients receiving therapy, scholarship recipients celebrating graduation, and volunteers serving breakfast before school. He slowly turned each page before looking back at the board. These programs are the reason the foundation exists, he said calmly. They are not the problem. They are the purpose. Another executive leaned forward. Purpose does not protect organizations from financial reality. Nathan nodded respectfully. Neither does abandoning the people who trusted us. The conversation remained remarkably calm, yet every sentence carried greater weight than an argument ever could. Charts appeared on the large screen showing projected financial losses if major donors withdrew their support. One advisor quietly explained how several facilities might struggle without additional funding. Nathan listened to every concern without interrupting. When everyone had finished speaking, he folded his hands together. If preserving our reputation requires sacrificing the families we promised to serve, then we have already lost something far more valuable than money. No one answered immediately. I watched several board members lower their eyes toward the photographs resting in front of them. In that moment, I finally understood why my father had trusted this man. Nathan never defended his own name before defending someone else's future. The meeting ended without celebration or applause. Several executives quietly gathered their belongings and informed Claire they would recommend ending their financial partnerships. Nathan stood and thanked each of them for their years of support before wishing them well. There was no bitterness in his voice, only gratitude. As the room slowly emptied, I remained standing beside the large window overlooking the city. You knew they might leave, I said softly. Nathan joined me, watching the morning traffic moving far below. Yes, and you still refused. He smiled faintly. Principles become meaningless the moment they are convenient. Those words settled deep inside my heart. Without thinking, I stepped closer. The night at the charity gala, everyone applauded me because they believed I was standing up to power. Nathan looked at me quietly. You were protecting what you believed was right. I shook my head gently. Today I watched someone protect what was actually right. Before he could respond, the conference room doors opened again. Several reporters waited respectfully outside, hoping for a statement about the board meeting. They immediately turned their cameras toward Nathan. Instead of speaking first, he looked at me and quietly asked, Emily, after everything you have learned, would you like to tell them the truth, or would you rather keep your peace? Either choice will always be yours. The cameras waited in complete silence, but for the first time I realized they were not waiting for Nathan. They were waiting for me. Every microphone pointed in my direction as reporters stood quietly outside the conference room, expecting another headline built on conflict. Nathan remained one step behind me without saying a single word. He had offered me a choice, and then he had honored it by refusing to influence my decision. That simple act gave me more courage than any speech ever could. I took a slow breath before walking toward the waiting cameras. The hallway became so quiet that even the soft sound of my footsteps echoed across the marble floor. A reporter finally broke the silence. Miss Carter, do you regret what happened at the charity gala? I closed my eyes for one brief moment, remembering the night I had raised my hand against a man I believed represented everything I despised. Then I looked directly into the cameras. Yes, I answered honestly, but not for the reason most people expect. Every pen stopped moving. Every camera remained fixed on my face. I do not regret defending my dignity, I continued. I regret believing rumors before I believed the truth. Another reporter immediately asked, Are you saying Nathan Brooks is innocent? I slowly shook my head. I am saying that I judged a human being without taking the time to understand his character. I told them about the rehabilitation center my father had helped protect, the anonymous donations that had kept families together, the scholarship programs that quietly changed lives. And the letter my father had written years before, asking only one thing of me: hear him before you judge him. I never mentioned private details my father wanted to remain confidential, but I shared enough for the truth to stand on its own. The man I met was not the man I imagined, I said softly. The strongest person in the room was never the one demanding respect. He was the one willing to lose it while continuing to do what was right. I glanced back toward Nathan. He remained exactly where he had been from the beginning, allowing my voice to become the only one that mattered. One journalist turned toward him and asked, "Mr. Brooks, would you like to respond?" Nathan smiled politely before looking back at me. Emily has already said everything that truly matters. There was no attempt to defend himself. No effort to repair his public image. He simply accepted whatever opinion the world might still choose to hold. That quiet restraint carried more weight than any carefully prepared statement ever could. News of the press conference spread quickly across the city. Some people changed their minds immediately. Others remained skeptical. Nathan never seemed concerned by either reaction. The following morning, he returned to the community center before sunrise, helping volunteers prepare breakfast for children exactly as he had done countless times before. I arrived a few minutes later carrying boxes of therapy supplies. No reporters followed us. No cameras waited outside the entrance. Inside, children laughed while parents shared coffee and volunteers arranged activity tables beneath colorful drawings covering the walls. Watching Nathan kneel beside a young boy struggling to assemble a wooden puzzle, I realized he had never measured success by public approval. He measured it by the number of people who quietly found hope after believing they had run out of reasons to keep searching. As the afternoon sunlight filled the building, Claire approached us carrying a small stack of letters that had arrived after the press conference. Most contained words of gratitude from families whose lives had been changed through the foundation. One envelope, however, carried no return address. Inside rested a single handwritten sentence: "The truth has finally been heard. Now it is time to discover who spent years trying to keep it buried." The anonymous letter rested inside my jacket for several days before I finally realized I no longer needed to know who had written it. The question that once consumed me had quietly changed. I was no longer searching for the person who had hidden the truth. I had already found the person who had chosen to live it every single day. Autumn slowly surrendered to winter, and the Brooks Community Foundation continued serving families exactly as it always had. Some financial partners never returned, yet new volunteers arrived every week carrying homemade meals, donated books, therapy equipment, and something even more valuable than money. They brought belief. The rehabilitation center expanded one classroom at a time. Scholarship recipients returned after graduation to mentor younger students. Parents who had once received help now organized food drives for families facing the same hardships they had overcome. Hope spread quietly through ordinary people making extraordinary choices. Nathan never spoke about sacrifice. He simply continued arriving before sunrise, unlocking doors, carrying boxes, fixing broken furniture, and greeting every volunteer by name. Watching him became one of the simplest and most meaningful parts of my life. One cold Saturday morning, I found him alone in the community garden, brushing fresh snow from a wooden bench my father had helped build years before. He looked up as I approached, offering the same calm smile that had never once asked anything from me. I sat beside him, wrapping my hands around a warm cup of coffee, while the lake beyond the trees reflected the pale winter sky. "I finally understand something," I said softly. Nathan waited without interrupting. "The night I slapped you, I believed I was protecting my dignity." He nodded gently. "You were protecting what you believed was true." I looked toward the families laughing near the entrance of the community center. Now I know dignity is not something we defend by hurting someone else. It is something we protect by refusing to abandon our values. Nathan lowered his eyes for a quiet moment before speaking. "Your father used to say almost the same thing." We both smiled, and for the first time the memory of my father brought peace instead of regret. A few weeks later, the foundation hosted a small celebration marking the opening of a new rehabilitation wing. There were no celebrities, no elaborate speeches, and no cameras waiting for dramatic moments. Children proudly displayed paintings across the walls while volunteers shared homemade desserts around long wooden tables. Claire quietly handed me a framed photograph taken earlier that afternoon. Nathan and I stood beside the rehabilitation garden surrounded by patients, families, therapists, and volunteers. No one stood in front of anyone else. We all stood together. "Your father would have loved this," Claire whispered. I looked across the room until my eyes found Nathan speaking with one of the youngest therapy patients. The little boy proudly showed him a drawing of two people planting a tree together beneath bright blue skies. Nathan thanked him as though he had just received the greatest gift in the world. I walked toward him, stopping only when we stood side by side. Without hesitation, I reached for his hand. This time there were no frightened whispers, no crowded ballroom, and no audience waiting to judge either of us. There were only two people who had finally learned that respect always grows before love does. Nathan looked at me with quiet warmth. "Are you certain?" he asked gently. I smiled through grateful tears that no longer carried sadness. "Completely." His fingers closed around mine with the same patience that had guided every step of our journey. Looking back now, I understand that the moment which changed my life was never the slap that silenced an entire ballroom. It was the quiet answer that followed, because true strength never demanded that I become someone else's. It simply gave me the freedom to become the best version of myself, and from that freedom, love found us both.